The Valkyrie had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were black like empty space. They had conquered 11 species across the galaxy. Every world they found, they took. Every species they met, they broke. Their method was simple. They would arrive with a great fleet of warships. They would send a message to the planet below. The message always said the same thing: surrender or die. And every species they had ever met chose to surrender. It was the logical choice. The Valkyrie ships could burn cities from orbit. Their soldiers carried weapons that turned flesh to ash. No one could fight them. No one tried. Supreme Arbiter Kethvon stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He watched the blue and green world grow larger on his viewing screen. Earth, the humans called it. He had studied their radio signals for years. He knew about their wars, their divisions, their petty conflicts over land and resources. They were a broken species fighting among themselves. They would be easy to conquer. Send the terms of integration. Kethvon said. His communications officer obeyed. The message went out to every device on the planet below. Televisions flickered. Phones buzzed. Computer screens went dark, then lit up with alien symbols that slowly translated into human languages. The terms were simple. All human governments would surrender immediately. All weapons would be destroyed. Valkyrie administrators would take control of every major city. Humans would work, breed, and die according to Valkyrie schedules. In exchange, they would be allowed to live. Kethvon expected an answer within hours. He had done this 11 times before. The pattern was always the same. First, there would be panic. Then, the leaders would argue among themselves. Finally, they would accept the truth. Resistance was death. On Earth, the world held its breath. In New York, the United Nations building filled with diplomats and generals. They shouted at each other. Some demanded immediate surrender. They pointed to the fleet in orbit, to the weapon signatures that human scientists could not even understand. Others demanded defiance. They spoke of freedom, of dignity, of dying on their feet rather than living on their knees. In Beijing, military commanders studied the alien ships. They ran simulations. Every simulation ended the same way. Total human defeat in less than 3 days. In Moscow, old generals remembered stories their grandfathers told about the Great Patriotic War, about never surrendering, about making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. In a small office in Geneva, a woman named Adaura Okonkwo watched the debates on her computer screen. She was 63 years old. Her hair was gray, and her eyes were tired. She had spent 30 years as a colonel in the Nigerian army, studying something called asymmetric warfare. This meant learning how weak forces could fight strong ones, how small armies could defeat big ones, how the will to resist could matter more than the weapons you carried. She watched the alien ships on her screen. She watched the panic spreading across the world. And she saw something that the Valkyrie did not see. The aliens had conquered 11 species. Every one of those species had surrendered. That meant the Valkyrie had never truly fought a war. They had never faced an enemy who would rather die than submit. They did not understand what that meant. A DIO, Ari picked up her phone. She called an old friend in the American military. Then she called another friend in China. Then another in Russia. Then another in Brazil. She talked for hours. She asked questions. She listened to answers. And slowly, a plan began to form. 40-8 hours after the alien message, Earth's government sent their reply. The message was short. It contained only 2 words: come down. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Kethvon read the message 3 times. He did not understand it. No species had ever said no before. He called his advisors. They did not understand it either. "They are bluffing," said Ground Commander Ythal. "They hope to negotiate better terms." Kethvan considered this. It was possible. Primitive species often tried to bargain. They did not understand that the Velthri did not bargain. The Velthri took. "We will teach them," Kethvan said. "Select a coastal city. Destroy it." The target was Mumbai. 20 million people lived there. At exactly noon local time, the Velthri fleet fired. Blue beams of energy fell from the sky like the fingers of an angry god. Buildings melted. Streets became rivers of fire. The ocean boiled for kilometers offshore. When the firing stopped, 12 million people were dead. 8 million more were wounded, burned, or dying. Mumbai was gone. In its place was a crater of glass, and Ashdod K, each single quotes VAN, sent another message to Earth. It said, "This is the price of defiance. Surrender now, or more will follow." He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected the humans to finally understand their place in the universe. Instead, something strange happened. Across Earth, people stopped panicking. The arguments in the United Nations ended. The debates in Beijing and Moscow and Washington went quiet. For a long moment, the whole planet seemed to hold its breath. Then the humans began to move dot in every country. Military bases came alive. Soldiers who had been waiting for orders finally received them. Factories that had been making cars and phones switched to making weapons. Scientists who had been studying the alien signals began studying the alien weapons instead. In small towns and big cities, ordinary people started to organize. They formed groups. They made plans. They gathered whatever weapons they could find. Some had guns. Some had knives. Some had nothing but their hands and their rage. Adara Okonkwo watched from her bunker in Switzerland. She had expected the aliens to kill a city. She had known it would happen. It was terrible, and it was necessary. The humans needed to see what they were fighting against. They needed to understand that surrender meant slavery. That compliance meant death anyway. Just slower. Now they understood. She opened a channel to resistance leaders around the world. Her network had grown in the last 2 days. She had contacts on every continent now. They were waiting for her orders. "They think they broke us," Adara said. "They think Mumbai was a lesson. But we are not the species they have conquered before. We do not surrender. We do not forget. And we do not forgive." She paused. On her screens, she could see the first movements beginning. Human soldiers taking up positions. Civilians preparing to hide and to fight. A whole planet getting ready for war. "Let them come down," she said. "Let them walk on our soil. Let them breathe our air and drink our water. And then let them learn what it means to fight a species that would rather burn than bow." In orbit, Kethvan gave the order to begin landing operations. Thousands of dropships detached from the fleet. They fell toward Earth like metal rain. The Velthri expected to find a conquered people waiting for them. They expected silence and submission. They expected the same thing they had found on 11 other worlds. They did not find it. They found war. 6 months had passed since the first Velthri soldiers landed on Earth. 6 months of blood and fire. 6 months of death. And the Velthri were learning something that no other war had ever taught them. Occupation and conquest were not the same thing. Ground Commander Ythal stood in his command center in what had once been Paris. The beautiful city was now a fortress. Velthri soldiers patrolled the streets. Gun turrets sat on every major building. Sensors scanned for any sign of human movement, and still, his soldiers kept dying. Last night, a supply convoy had been attacked outside the city. 30 soldiers dead. The humans had come out of nowhere, struck fast, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. This morning, A barracks in Lion had exploded. Someone had planted a bomb inside. 50 more soldiers dead. Ythel looked at the map on his screen. Red dots marked attack locations. There were hundreds of them. Thousands. They covered every continent, every country, every city the Velthari had tried to hold. How is this possible? He asked his aide. We have superior weapons, superior technology, superior numbers. How are they still fighting? The aide had no answer. Neither did anyone else. The truth was something the Velthari could not understand. They came from a species that valued order and hierarchy. When their leaders spoke, they obeyed. When a stronger force appeared, they submitted. It was logical. It was efficient. It was the way the universe worked. But humans were not like that. Humans had spent their entire history fighting. They had fought each other for land, for food, for ideas, for gods. They had developed 1,000 ways to kill. They had written books about warfare, studied it in schools, built monuments to their greatest killers. War was in their blood. War was in their bones. And now, for the first time, they had a common enemy. Adara Okonkwo sat in her underground bunker somewhere in the Swiss Alps. She had not seen sunlight in 3 months. Her hair had gone completely white. But her eyes were bright, and her mind was sharp. Around her, screens showed feeds from every continent. Resistance cells reporting in. Supply movements. Enemy positions. The war was too big for any one person to control, but Adara did not try to control it. She guided it. She shaped it. She connected the pieces and let them do what humans did best. Fight. Her strategy was simple. The Velthari could not be defeated in open battle. Their weapons were too powerful. Their ships still orbited overhead, ready to burn any large gathering of human forces. So the humans did not gather. They did not form armies. They became shadows instead. Every Velthari soldier was a target. Every supply line was a target. Every command post, every communication tower, every vehicle was a target. The humans struck and vanished. They hid among civilians who would never betray them. They turned every city into a maze and every forest into a trap. The Velthari called it terrorism. The humans called it survival. In Snow Hollow, a man named Carlos led a cell of 200 fighters. They had started with hunting rifles and kitchen knives. Now they carried Velthari plasma rifles taken from dead soldiers. They had learned to use them, to repair them, to modify them. Carlos had been a history teacher before the invasion. He had taught his students about guerrilla warfare, about how small forces had defeated great empires throughout human history. Now he was living that history. His target today was a Velthari command post in the city center. Intelligence said 40 soldiers were inside. Carlos had 60 fighters. Bad odds by normal standards. But Carlos did not plan to fight normally. His team had spent 3 weeks preparing. They had tunneled under the streets, connecting old sewer lines to the basement of the building next to the command post. They had gathered explosives from construction sites and mining operations. They had studied the enemy patrol patterns until they knew them better than the enemy did. At exactly 3 in the morning, Carlos gave the signal. The explosions came from below. The building shook. The command post walls cracked. Before the dust had settled, Carlos and his fighters poured through the holes they had made. The battle was over in 12 minutes. 38 Velthari soldiers died. 2 escaped. Carlos lost 11 fighters. It was a victory. One of thousands. Reports like this came to Ythel every day. His forces were bleeding, not in great battles, but in 1,000 small cuts. His soldiers were afraid to leave their bases. They were afraid to sleep. They jumped at shadows and shot at sounds. Some had begun to refuse orders. Ythel sent a message to Supreme Arbiter Kethvon, still waiting in orbit. He requested orbital bombardment of resistant strongholds. Burn the cities. Burn the forests. Burn everything until the humans had nowhere left to hide. Kethvon refused. The other conquered species were watching. The Kelthari on their frozen world. The Moradi in their underground cities. The Vashik on their desert plains. If the Velthari could not hold one primitive world without destroying it, those species might start to wonder. They might start to question. They might start to remember what freedom felt like. So the ground war continued. And the humans kept fighting. By month 8, Velthari casualties had exceeded all projections. They had expected to lose perhaps 1,000 soldiers during the entire pacification. They had lost 50,000. Supply ships were being shot down by human missiles launched from hidden locations. Communication lines were constantly being cut. Entire patrols were disappearing without a trace. The soldiers began to call Earth by a new name. They called it the Grave World. Then came the Battle of Snowpollo. Ithil decided to make an example. He gathered 5,000 soldiers, his best troops, and sent them to destroy Carlos and his resistance cell. They would sweep through the city block by block. They would kill everyone they found. They would burn what was left. Carlos knew they were coming. He had spies everywhere. He had 3 days to prepare. When the Velthari entered the city, they found it empty. The streets were silent. The buildings were dark. It felt like a trap. It was a trap. Carlos had not fled. He had hidden. His fighters were in the walls, under the floors, on the rooftops. They watched the alien soldiers spread out through the streets. They waited until the enemy was deep in the urban maze. Then they struck. The first explosions collapsed entire streets. Buildings came down on top of Velthari squads. The aliens tried to regroup, but there was nowhere to regroup. Every direction led to ambush. Every building hid enemies. The humans knew the city. The city was their weapon. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it ended, 3,000 Velthari soldiers were dead. Their bodies lay buried under rubble or floating in the polluted river. The survivors fled in terror, telling stories of humans who appeared from solid walls and vanished like ghosts. Ethel received the casualty report in silence. 3,000 soldiers. In one day. In one city. He sent another message to Kethvon. This time, he did not request orbital bombardment. He demanded it. Kethvon agreed. He had no choice anymore. 15 cities burned. New York, Shanghai, Lagos, Berlin, Cairo. Millions more died. The sky turned black with ash. The humans watched their cities become graveyards, but they did not surrender. Instead, something changed. The rage that had been burning in human hearts became something colder, something harder, something patient. Adara sat in her bunker and watched the fires on her screens. She had known this would happen too. She had planned for it. The orbital strikes were terrible, but they were also a sign. A sign that the Velthari were desperate. A sign that the ground war was working. She opened a channel to every resistance cell on the planet. Her message was short. They are burning our cities because they cannot hold them. They are killing our people because they cannot control us. This is not defeat. This is proof that we are winning. Keep fighting. Keep dying if you must. But never stop. Never surrender. They will break before we do. Across the burned and bleeding earth, humans listened. And they believed. The Velthari had wanted obedience. They had wanted silence and submission. They had wanted another easy conquest to add to their empire. Instead, they had found a species that would rather burn with their world than bow to another, and they were beginning to understand what that meant. 2 years had passed since the Velthari first came to Earth. The war had changed everything. The occupation was bleeding the Dominion dry. Ships that should have been conquering new worlds sat in Earth orbit, watching for threats that never stopped coming. Soldiers who should have been enforcing order on a dozen planets were dying in human streets. Resources that should have built new colonies were being poured into a war that would not end on and across Volturi space. The other conquered species were watching. On the frozen world of Kelthur, workers whispered to each other in the mines. They shared stories about Earth, about a species that refused to bow, about soldiers who fought with stolen weapons and homemade bombs, about cities that burned but kept fighting in the underground cities of Morath. Engineers secretly recorded every piece of news about the human war. They analyzed tactics. They studied strategies. They remembered what their own people had lost when they surrendered. On the desert plains of Vasik, warriors who had given up their weapons generations ago began to search for them again. Old caches hidden in caves and buried under sand. Forgotten but not destroyed, the Volturi Dominion had ruled through fear. They had made surrender seem like the only choice. But Earth had shown that there was another choice. It was a terrible choice. It was a bloody choice. But it existed, and that was enough to make the conquered species remember. Hope. Supreme Arbiter Kethven felt the tremors in his empire. Reports came daily of unrest on subject worlds. Small acts of defiance. Workers slowing their production. Messages spreading through secret networks. Nothing big enough to crush. Everything big enough to worry. The Dominion Council demanded answers. They demanded victory. They demanded an end to the war that was slowly destroying everything they had built. Kethvan had none of these things to give. On Earth, humanity had changed. The scattered resistance cells had grown into something larger. Adara Okonkwo had spent 2 years connecting them, organizing them, turning chaos into coordination. Now, there was a global command structure. Leaders from every continent working together. Sharing information. Planning operations. Fighting is one, but more importantly, humans had learned from their enemy. Every captured weapon was studied. Every piece of alien technology was taken apart and put back together. Scientists who had survived the orbital strikes worked in hidden laboratories under mountains and beneath frozen ice. They asked questions that no one had asked before. How did Volturi shields work? How did their power cells store energy? How did their ships bend space? And slowly, they found answers. The first human-made plasma rifle was ugly. It was too big, too heavy, and it exploded after firing 3 shots. But it worked. It proved that humans could copy alien technology. The second rifle was better. The 10th was reliable. The 100th was a weapon that Volturi soldiers learned to fear. Then came the ships. Building a spaceship in secret seemed impossible. The Volturi watched from orbit. Their sensors covered the entire planet. Any large construction would be detected and destroyed. But humans had learned to be clever. The ships were built in pieces. An engine here. A hull plate there. Power cells in one location. Weapons in another. Thousands of components made in hundreds of hidden factories across the world. Nothing big enough to see. Everything small enough to hide. The assembly happened in space itself. Human shuttles, disguised as debris, carried the pieces to a Lagrange point far from Earth, a place where gravity balanced itself, a place the Volturi had dismissed as empty. The work took 18 months. It cost thousands of lives. Workers died from radiation exposure. Shuttles were shot down by Volturi patrols. Supply chains were discovered and destroyed, but the work continued. Because humans understood something the Volturi did not. They understood that the only way out was through. Admiral Chun Wei had been a naval officer before the invasion. Now she commanded something that should not exist. A human space fleet. 40-7 ships. They were ugly things, built from salvaged alien parts and human engineering. They looked like they had been welded together by angry children. Their hulls did not match. Their systems were improvised. Half of them had never been tested in combat, but they carried Velthari weapons. And they were crewed by humans who had nothing left to lose. Chen Wei gathered her captains for a final briefing. They met in a cargo hold that served as a conference room. The walls were bare metal. The air smelled of oil and fear. "We are outnumbered," Chen Wei told them. "The enemy fleet has over 200 ships in orbit. We have 47. They have centuries of space combat experience. We have 18 months. They expect us to hide. They expect us to run." She paused. She looked at the faces around her. Young and old. Men and women. Every nationality on Earth represented in this room. "We are going to attack," she said. "We are going to hit them where they think they are safest. We are going to show them that this war is not just on the ground anymore. It is everywhere. And it will never stop." Operation Prometheus began at dawn Earth time. The human fleet appeared on Velthari, sensors like ghosts materializing from nothing. One moment, the space near Earth was empty. The next, 47 ships were burning toward the orbital fleet. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Kefam watched in disbelief. His sensors officers scrambled to confirm what they were seeing. Ships. Human ships. Armed with Velthari weapons. "Impossible," he whispered. "This is impossible." But it was happening. The battle was chaos. The human ships were faster than they should have been, more maneuverable than their ugly frames suggested. They did not fight in formation like Velthari ships. They fought in packs, like wolves. They circled and struck and retreated and struck again. The Velthari had numbers. They had experience. They had superior firepower. But they had never fought an enemy like this. An enemy that did not care about survival. An enemy that flew directly into their guns and kept firing until the last moment. Human ships died. One by one, they were cut down by Velthari beams. 31 ships out of 47 were destroyed in the first 6 hours. But the Velthari were dying too. Chen Wei led the final assault herself. Her flagship, a twisted mass of metal called the Defiance, targeted the Velthari command carrier. She knew she would not survive. She did not care. "All ships," she broadcast on open channel. "Follow me in." 16 human ships charged the heart of the Velthari formation. They broke through the defensive screen. They reached the carrier, and they fired everything they had. The explosion lit up the sky over Earth. People on the ground looked up and saw a new sun burning in the heavens. A sun of victory. When the Battle of the Pale Blue Dot ended, the Velthari had lost their orbital superiority. 137 of their ships were destroyed or crippled. Their command carrier was gone. Their fleet was scattered and broken. Admiral Chen Wei died with her ship. So did most of her crews. But they had done what everyone said was impossible. They had beaten the Velthari and Space. Ground Commander Yithal, still trapped on Earth with his surviving soldiers, sent a desperate message to the Dominion homeworld. "They are not cattle," he wrote. "They are not slaves waiting to be taken. They are something else. Something we have never seen. Send everything you have. Send the entire Dominion fleet. Or send nothing and let us die here. Half measures will not work. This species does not understand half measures." The Dominion Council received his message. They debated for 3 days. Some wanted to abandon Earth, cut their losses, forget this nightmare world and its nightmare people, but others understood what that would mean. If the Velthari retreated from one world, every conquered species would see. Every slave would wonder. Every chain would weaken. The vote was close. But in the end, they chose war. They would send everything. The largest fleet in Velthari history. 3,000 warships. Enough to crack planets. Enough to burn worlds. Earth would die. Every human would die. This would not be conquest anymore. This would be extinction. The message went out to every Valkyrie system. Ships began to gather. The armada began to form. And on Earth, humans looked up at the stars and prepared for the final battle. 14 months after the Battle of the Pale Blue Dot, the Dominion Armada arrived at the edge of the solar system. 3,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in Valkyrie history. They came from every corner of the Dominion, called to this one place for this one purpose: the complete destruction of Earth, the complete extinction of humanity. Supreme Arbiter Kethvan stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Eternal Judgment. He had waited 14 months for this moment. 14 months of shame. 14 months of watching his career burn alongside his fleet. Now he would have his revenge. "Begin the advance," he ordered. The armada moved forward like a great wave of death. Sensors showed the human defenses ahead. A few hundred ships. Some weapon platforms around the moon. Nothing that could stop what was coming. Kethvan allowed himself a small smile. The humans had surprised him once. They would not surprise him again. But 14 months was a long time. On Earth, humans had not been idle. They had known the Valkyrie would return. They had known the next battle would decide everything. So they had prepared. The shipyards that had been secret were now open. They worked day and night, building ships as fast as possible. 200 vessels now formed the human fleet, still outnumbered 15-1. But these ships were better than the ones that had fought before. Human engineers had improved every system. Human pilots had trained in simulators for thousands of hours. The moon had become a fortress. Weapon platforms dotted its surface. Railguns and missile batteries and energy weapons salvaged from Valkyrie wrecks. The lunar colonies, once scientific outposts, were now military bases. Mars held fuel depots and repair stations. The moons of Jupiter hid emergency supplies. Humanity had spread through the solar system in 14 months, planting the seeds of survival everywhere they could reach. And in the asteroid belt, they had built something special. They called it the Shepherd's Crook. It was a mass driver of enormous size, a machine that could hurl rocks at speeds close to light itself. It had taken 2 years to build. It had cost more resources than humanity had ever gathered for any single project. And it waited, silent and patient, for the moment when it would be needed. Admiral Yuki Tanaka commanded the human fleet now. She had been Chen Wei's second. She had survived the Battle of the Pale Blue Dot by luck alone. Now she carried her mentor's burden. She watched the Valkyrie Armada approach on her screens. 3,000 ships. The numbers were overwhelming. The logical part of her mind said this was impossible. They could not win this battle, but Tanaka had stopped believing in impossible 3 years ago. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is Admiral Tanaka. The enemy is coming. They think they will destroy us today. They think this is the end. They are wrong." She paused. Across 200 ships, crews listened. "We are humanity. We do not surrender. We do not kneel. We do not die quietly. If they want our world, they will pay for it in blood. They will pay for every planet, every moon, every asteroid. They will pay for every human life they have taken. And when this battle is over, they will remember Earth forever." The human fleet moved to meet the enemy. The first engagement happened near Jupiter's orbit. Human ships struck at the Valkyrie flanks, trying to slow the advance. They fought in small groups, hitting and running, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to concentrate fire. The Valkyrie commanders were frustrated. They wanted a decisive battle. The humans refused to give them one. Instead, they fought a war of movement, a war of patience, a war that cost the Valkyrie ships in time with every passing hour. But numbers told in the end. The human fleet was pushed back toward Mars. then back toward Earth. Ships were lost. Good people died. The Veltari kept coming. By the time the Armada reached Earth orbit, the human fleet had been reduced to 43 ships. The moon's defenses had been destroyed. The weapon platforms were silent wreckage. There was nothing left between humanity and extinction. Kethvon savored the moment. He had done it. Despite everything, despite 3 years of humiliation, he had done it. Earth lay before him, defenseless. The humans had fought well, but they had lost. "Prepare for final bombardment," he ordered. "We will cleanse this world completely. Not one human will remain alive." His weapons officers began targeting protocols. Cities appeared on their screens. Billions of lives, soon to be erased. Then the sensors screamed a warning. 3 objects were approaching at impossible speed. They had come from the asteroid belt, accelerating for days, building velocity that Veltari physics said should not be possible. 3 rocks, each the size of a city block, moving at a significant fraction of light speed. Kethvon had no time to give orders. The Shepherd's Crook had fired. The first asteroid hit the center of the Veltari formation. At that speed, it did not simply collide. It released energy like a small sun. Ships vanished. Shields meant nothing. Armor meant nothing. 200 Veltari vessels died in a single instant. The second asteroid hit the rear of the formation, cutting off retreat. Another 200 ships gone. The third asteroid missed its target. A Veltari destroyer sacrificed itself, intercepting the rock before it could hit the flagship. The explosion destroyed everything within 100 kilometers. But Kethvon survived. He survived to see his armada in chaos. The human fleet attacked. 43 ships against over 2,000. But the Veltari formation was broken. Their command structure was shattered. Ships that had never faced true opposition were suddenly fighting for their lives against an enemy that refused to die. Admiral Tanaka led from the front. A ship, the Inheritance, dove into the heart of the enemy fleet. She targeted command vessels, communication ships, anything that held the Veltari together. Her pilots followed her example. They fought like demons. They fought like humans. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was not a clean victory. Human ships died. Human crews burned. The price was terrible, but the Veltari paid more. When it was over, the Great Armada existed only as debris. Broken hulls and frozen bodies drifting in Earth orbit. The largest fleet in Veltari history, destroyed by a species they had called primitive. Kethvon sat alone on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment. His ship was crippled. His fleet was gone. His empire's future had burned before his eyes. A communication signal reached him. A human voice. Supreme Arbiter Kethvon. It was a woman's voice. Old and tired but strong. "My name is Adara Okonkwo. I speak for Earth." Kethvon said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You came to our world expecting sheep," Adara continued. "You expected us to bow, to kneel, to accept our chains like every other species you had conquered. You were wrong." She paused. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. "We are not sheep. We are wolves. And you walked into our den." Kethvon found his voice. "You have won nothing. The Dominion will send more fleets. They will never stop. You have only delayed your extinction." "Perhaps," Adara said. "But I do not think so. Your 11 conquered species are watching this moment. They are seeing what we have done. They are remembering that submission is a choice. And they are beginning to choose differently." Kethvon felt cold. He understood what she meant. The Dominion ruled through fear. If that fear was broken, everything would fall. "Go home," Adara said. "Take your survivors and go. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not for conquest. Earth is where empires come to die. And if they ever return, we will be waiting. The communication ended. Kethvon gave the order to retreat. 17 Velthari ships limped toward the edge of the solar system. 17 out of 3,000. As they fled, Adara watched from her bunker. The screens showed the enemy running from humans, running from the species they had tried to break. She was tired. So tired. 3 years of war. Billions dead. Cities burned. A world scarred forever. But they had won. On the 11 conquered worlds, the news spread like fire. Earth had won. The Velthari had been beaten. The impossible had happened. On Kalthar, workers stopped their machines and looked at each other. On Marath, engineers began drawing plans for weapons. On Vasik, warriors uncovered their hidden caches and began to train. The Dominion was cracking. And it would never be whole again. In the void between stars, human signals went out. Messages in every frequency, carrying the story of what had happened. Other civilizations heard. Other species listened. They wondered what manner of creature had just announced itself to the galaxy. They would learn. The Velthari had wanted obedience. They had wanted silence and submission. They had wanted another easy conquest. They got war. They would not forget the lesson. No one would.